Recording. And let me just say welcome to everybody who's online, whether you're video or just by audio. Very happy to have everybody in. This is a topic that folks have been asking me a lot about, so I go to the person that I trust more than anyone, which is our academic director here, Paul Heaton. Paul's going to talk to us about data collection, about why it's important. So you know, as I said, Paul's our academic director here at the Quattrone Center. He comes to us from RAND Corporation, where he, I think, Paul, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, ran the civil justice program at RAND before joining us here as academic director. So Paul does work all around the country with criminal justice efforts of helping them to analyze data to be able to make better informed decisions about policy making and try to determine whether policies that have been put in place improve them better. So Paul, I'm really super happy that you could join us today. And I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of take over from here.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Marissa. And thanks everyone for bearing with us with the technology and figuring it out. And also, you know, I know that we're busy, particularly at this time of the year, end of year, lots of things going on. And so I appreciate you taking some time to talk with us about data. And I'm hoping that this will be a useful conversation. And I've tried to plan the discussion such that we'll have some time at the end if there are questions or if people want to talk about specific situations that are applicable to their jurisdiction. And you know, as Marissa said,
you're the best. Thank you.
I'm coming to this from the perspective of being someone who's worked with a lot of different police departments, you know, prosecutors, public defenders, courts, in terms of helping them to think about data collection, particularly in the context of trying to evaluate new initiatives that they might have. I also am a consumer of data, and I've taken data from criminal justice agencies and used them in evaluation work, which has been, you know, kind of widely used in individual jurisdictions, in Congress, and other places. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. What I want to do today is I'm just going to talk briefly, first of all, and think a little bit about a rationale for, you know, why collect data. I'll share some about different types of data that we might collect, and I'll present to you a kind of a simple hierarchy to help you think a little bit about data might go about collecting it. Thanks for those who participated in the survey, and I'll report some of the results from that, and you can kind of compare your data practices to those reported in a national survey that was done last year of prosecutor offices across the country, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And in the end, I'm hoping to give you some constructive ideas to the extent that you're interested in kind of improving your use of data within your own organization. Hopefully you can come away with this with some you know, concrete ideas for how you might do that. And I've tried to kind of frame the discussion in a fairly general way. Obviously, you're participating here as a result of you know, kind of work with the BJA, or you may have specific initiatives in mind, but I'm hoping that some of the principles that we describe here will be things that you know, are kind of useful to you, not only for the context of this project, but as you think more generally about the use of data in your work, and as you move forward and perhaps launch other initiatives or want to do other things with data. So to start with, I wanted to spend a little bit of time and just think a little bit about, you know, why is it that we want to bother to collect data? After all, you're all very busy and you're doing very important work, and you know, time spent thinking about collecting, analyzing data is time that you can't spend doing other important things. And so I think it's very natural to kind of ask, you know, why should I bother with this? Other than, of course, perhaps, hey, I got a grant and one of the requirements is collecting data. But that aside, right, why, you know, how can data help us? And I just want to highlight a few of the reasons as we get started off to help us think about why might this be an investment that's worth making, and how can it be beneficial to us in our organization. And as I think about data, there's really a few things to keep in mind. First of all, at some basic level, right, Without some sort of data collection, it becomes very hard for us to understand the work that we're doing and to make improvements in any sort of a systematic way. We've probably all had the experience in an organization, right, of having some leaders say, gee, we're going to move in some new direction, we're going to implement X. Kind of ask, gee, why should we do that? Why are we doing it? Well, I think that's the right thing to do. And then only to have, recognize, maybe a few months down the line that X wasn't such a great innovation after all, right? And one of the ways that we can prevent that and ensure that as we're making changes and doing new things that they're actually helpful is through collection and analysis of data. I think using data to improve our operations also connects with another shared goal that I've seen in almost every organization I've worked with in my career, whether we're an innocence organization, a prosecutor, whether, even private companies, right? Most organizations recognize that your organizational culture is essential in mission achievement. And I haven't yet run into an organization where they haven't said, gee, one of the things we'd like to be part of our organizational culture is the idea that we can learn and improve. And data collection can be a critical tool in building that sort of a culture, right? Because it's something that we do on an ongoing basis, that we do continually. It gives us an opportunity to reflect on what we're doing, how it's successful, how it may be less successful. And so it can serve that critical role. I think another more pragmatic reason for collecting data has to do with the constituencies that we serve. As prosecutors, right, we have county commissioners, perhaps, we have city council people and an innocence organization, right? We may have donors or other supporters that we work with. And one of the things that we want to be able to do is to explain to those decision makers why supporting the things that we're doing is important, why we should be allocated the necessary resources that we need in order to do our jobs effectively. And data can be a critical tool in accomplishing that. I think about an experience I had very early in my career where I worked with a police chief who wanted to go to his city council and ask for a substantial increase in the number of police officers. And when he first did that, there was, well, gee, this is expensive. It was only when he came back and was able to bring data and research saying, hey, here's to suggest if we force of the reductions we would anticipate in terms of crime control, here are some of the benefits to the city. That was something that, was much more effective. And with respect to work we do in conviction integrity and in other areas, that same sort of data-driven approach can be very helpful in helping people to understand why what we do is important. A final reason is, ultimately, I think we all have a shared interest in ensuring that people who are kind of looking at us from the outside have confidence in the work that we're doing, confidence in the justice system to the extent that it's warranted. And providing data allows us to provide greater transparency to the public in terms of what we're doing. And that helps to foster a set of openness that can kind of improve understanding, confidence in what we do. So there's, there are a lot of reasons to collect data. So let me shift gears now and talk a little bit about, okay, so if we think that we ought to collect data, what should we actually be thinking about collecting? And let's just imagine that we're starting some sort of initiative, right? A pilot of some sort. Maybe we're just starting a conviction integrity unit, although the principles I describe are going to be true more generally. And we want to ask ourselves, all right, we're just getting started. What sort of data could we collect and what could we use it for? So I'm going to describe now what I would say are kind of 4 different tiers of data collection, starting from the very most basic information. And I'll talk about as we get more and more advanced and based on the survey responses, looking at some of your organizations, I think there's some indications that some of you are at some of these more advanced stages, other people a little earlier on, and that's all okay wherever you are. I'm hoping that this framework will help you think a little bit more about where you might be able to expand. So kind of at the front end, at the very basic level, right? If we were just starting from scratch, kind of level one is we could collect information, again, how many cases in to our pilot or to our conviction integrity unit or to our innocence project, and then how many cases on the back end are going out and what happens to those cases. So that's something that I think is probably within the ambit of most organizations to collect, right? This is data which you wouldn't even necessarily need any information technology, right? You could have paper lists. I don't think that would be ideal in terms of analysis, right? But if you think about when you enter a building and exit a building, many buildings we sign in, and so they have a non-technology paper-based way of collecting this type of information. In last year, the Urban Institute actually did a survey of prosecutor offices and tried to ask them, okay, how many of you collect various types of data? So you might be interested to see that in this national survey, there are about 150 prosecutors' offices who participated. The vast majority of prosecutors' offices said, yeah, we actually collect this kind of level one basic data, right? 87% had data at least on the count or the number of cases that was coming in. 82%, a little bit lower going out. Interestingly enough, though, right, a non-trivial fraction, this 13% down here, actually didn't collect this sort of data. As you can imagine, that was predominantly smaller offices. And, you know, lest we think we're picking on prosecutors, right? I've certainly worked with defender organizations. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking with the head defender in a jurisdiction of about 1 million people and said, hey, how many cases do you handle in a year? Not really sure, right? So it's, you know, not, other organizations have these challenges. Looking at your survey responses, we're a little bit, I think, more capable group in this respect, right? Everyone reported in their organization at least some ability to be able to track kind of ingoing versus outgoing cases. Now, you might say to yourself, gee, you know, that seems fairly basic, right? And is it really that useful to collect case counts? And I would argue that, in fact, even with that kind of the barest minimum of data, there's actually quite a lot of useful things that you could learn just from that limited data, right? So for example, by having counts of incoming cases, you have a good idea of what the sort of demand for the service that you're providing. If you have a conviction integrity unit, how many people want to access that? If we were starting a new expungement program, right? Might be very hard at the outset to predict what the demand is going to be. Once we start counting cases, we actually have a good idea. And that can be very helpful in making decisions about, for example, calibrating how many staff we need. If we start our CIU and immediately get dozens of cases, that's kind of a different staffing challenge than one in which we kind of immediately get, you know, a handful of cases or hundreds of cases. I also think that we maybe don't recognize how useful this basic data can be for helping people who are going to be applying or submitting cases to us some sort of idea about how the process is going to work, right? So if I'm thinking of submitting a case to an innocence project, or if I'm, you know, let's just take a general criminal case, right? And if I'm a police department and I'm booking people and sending them to the prosecutor, how long is it going to take? What's going to happen? We can compare the volume of incoming cases to the number of outgoing cases and have some pretty useful information as a person who uses the system of how it operates and what the likely outcomes are. I think we can also, even with this barest minimum of information, get some very useful insights about, is the process working the way we want it to, right? By looking at the outcomes and thinking about how those compare to what we designed the process for. So I think you've heard from, or maybe will hear soon from, the head of our conviction integrity unit here in Philadelphia, right? There's an interesting example of a unit that was set up, and initially, I think after a while, and they had accumulated some experience, were able to look at some data on what was happening with their cases and recognizing that, gee, you know, we aren't necessarily having, you know, being able to identify errors or identify exonerations in the way that we anticipated when we first started this unit. And so that led to some reformulations and some revisions, which I would argue have allowed that unit to function more effectively and be able to accomplish much more recently. And so that was something that was enabled in part through the use of data and understanding what those outcomes were. I also think that even this basic data can provide can increase your ability to justify investments to make the process better, right? So if we learn that there's, you know, hundreds of people who want to access the conviction integrity unit and we only have, you know, 1 or 2 prosecutors assigned to that, then that helps us to be able to make arguments and think about staffing. If we're an innocence organization, right, and we want to go to donors and encourage them to support our efforts, being able to say, hey, there's all this pent up demand, there's a lot of people that we can't get to because we don't have the resources, you know, that can be a helpful and compelling argument, but we need the data in order to be able to say that. So that's kind of the first level of data collection. Now, let me talk about the next level, and then I'll just pause for a second, see if there are any questions or comments. We'll actually skip the electronic case management for a second. So this is kind of level 1. So let's imagine that we're doing that. And again, thankfully, all of the people who were able to respond to the survey at least had the ability to collect these case numbers. So if we're to that point, what else could we add on in order to get additional insights? So I would argue that maybe the next level of data that you'd want to collect would be some sort of what I'd call intermediate processing outcomes. So some sort of information about what sort of things are happening to cases as they move through your internal process. So for example, one simple thing is what fraction of cases get screened out very quickly due to some sort of kind of invalid formatting or some sort of defect in how they're presented. So this would be, you know, the person who in a traditional criminal case, right? This would be the person who gets arrested and booked by the police. And then it turns out there's some illegal search or process violation so that the case gets kicked very quickly. Or maybe it's, you know, if you're an innocence organization, it's a case that comes in, but that immediately the person doesn't state, you know, kind of any sort of clear basis for assistance. And so you're not able to move forward with the case. So being able to understand how cases progress through various points of the process, maybe we could collect data on the number of cases that we've kind of internally completed our process and that are waiting for action somewhere else in the courts or by another stakeholder. One of the things I'd include with this intermediate processing data might be some information about which staff are working on which parts of the process, and ideally maybe at least in aggregate some information about the amount of time. So if we were to kind of add that layer of data on, and again, here we're still just talking about counts of cases, what would we get from that? Well, there's actually, again, quite a bit of additional insights you could get. You could have a much better idea potentially of how you could align staff resources to workload, right? If you find that there's a large number of cases that are getting kind of screened out initially, and only a small number of cases that move further on in the process, that could inform decisions about how much staff time do you want to allocate to kind of going through initial applications versus more detailed investigations later on. We could also potentially learn something about what I might call pain points in the process, right? And that could be very useful for public outreach and training. So for example, if we learn that there's a lot of cases that our organization is able to move through quickly, and then they get to the courts or other places, and then they just sit there forever before final resolution, that provides some information that we can use to advocate for changes or improvements to the process for other actors. Or if we realize that, hey, there's a lot of cases that we're getting that just are kind of, we have to screen out very quickly, because they don't meet our requirements for submissions, then that provides an opportunity to go back and do training or outreach to the people who are submitting cases in order to allow them to improve their processes so that they're going to have a better chance of getting further along in the process. So again, with some kind of minimal additional data pieces, we're able to get even more insights. All right, let me just pause here before I go on and talk about levels 3 and 4. And let me just stop and ask if there are any kind of questions about anything I've shared thus far with respect to these first tiers of data. Okay, and that's fine. Seeing none, I will go ahead and talk about number 3 here. So the next stage that we get to in thinking about data is what I would call a move towards getting information, not just about aggregate counts of cases, but now this is where we actually try and dial in and for individual cases, get some more detail. So so the types of details that we might that might be relevant could be things like what are the particular charges that exist in cases if you want to take the perspective of an overall prosecutor office or perhaps even some subunit like a conviction integrity unit. Another example might be defendant demographics. That could be information about the cases or other attributes of cases. Is this a case that involves an eyewitness or some sort of forensic evidence? At what process, how far did the case proceed in the legal process before it was referred to us might be another example of a case level attribute that we could collect data on. So again, in the national survey that I referenced, they actually asked prosecutor offices, and again, this is thinking about general criminal cases in the office, but just to give you a little bit of a reference, each office was asked, could you actually compile statistics that would let you understand what's happening to cases depending on the origin of the case? So for example, which police department submitted the case to us, or what type of offense, or offender characteristics. And so on this slide, you can actually see, based on the national survey, to what extent kind of an average prosecutor's office would have been able to generate these types of breakdowns. And so as you can see, right, it's certainly the case that there are many offices that are collecting some of these case level details that allow them to get additional insights, but it's not uniformly true. And it's also the case that depending on the types of information, there's variation, right? So many places have the ability to look across different sources of incoming cases and do tabulations. A smaller fraction, about 2 and 3, are able to look and say, okay, let's look at characteristics of cases based upon who within our office handled them, which might be interesting. I think the area where there is the least ability to get insights was with respect to the characteristics of the alleged offender or the offender in the case where fewer than half of offices had the ability to do that. So if we look at your survey responses, and again, I recognize, right, that this is prosecutors talking generally about criminal cases. I know that some of the respondents were innocence organizations, and you may have been thinking it with reference to cases that are referred to a CIU rather than kind of your entire office, and that's okay. But just to kind of think a little bit comparatively, what did we see in our survey? So again, I think that folks on the call are maybe a little bit ahead of the curve relative to the average prosecutor, at least, right? Most of you had the ability to get some insights about cases based upon the origin or the type of the offense. I think similar to what we see in the national data, the area where there is a little bit less capability is an ability to do breakdown or understand what's happening with cases across different types of offender characteristics. Now, again, as we think about, these kind of level 3 cases, there's really a lot that once we have individual case level data that we can learn as we add this layer on. It becomes much easier for researchers like me to be able to come in and try and understand what are the factors that affect the outcomes that occur. One of, I think, the really valuable insights we can get once we begin having this type of data is an understanding of whether the process works differently for certain types of cases. And again, that could be useful for a host of reasons. For example, right, if we learn as we collect case level details that it's persistently the case that we have a harder time moving cases that involve eyewitness testimony through the process, then that can facilitate additional training that we might do internally. It could inform some resource allocation decisions as to how much we want to staff or focus on those particular cases. So those are insights that would be enabled with these sort of data. It also gives us the ability, and this I think is much less common both in prosecutor offices and specific units, to the extent that we have information of this type about, who's working on the cases, the attorney here at the bottom, to try and understand, what are differences in outcomes across different managers of cases. And, that sort of information could actually be quite useful, right? So if we were able to learn, because we collected this data, that, Bill seems to be able to get particularly, excellent outcomes, or is able to handle a certain type of case very efficiently, that could facilitate knowledge generation and training for other people in the office. We could go to him. The data allows us to see, boy, you're particularly good at this. Why don't you help the rest of us understand how to improve? So those are things that we get once we kind of collect that level of data. So then the final tier I would mention is, and kind of the gold standard of data collection is once we've been able to collect the information at kind of the individual case level about what's happening in our organization, it would be actually building linkages to other systems and other organizations within the larger criminal justice system. So again, if we were to think about, as an example, just a typical criminal case, it would be taking what we have in the prosecutor's office and, for example, linking it to arrest records or other records that exist on the policing side, or perhaps records on the back end that track people's future contacts with the criminal justice system. In some examples, I think fairly innovative ones, people have been able to link records that exist in prosecutors' offices or from courts to other data systems, such as those that track people's earnings over time or their utilization of public programs. And again, with these sort of data linkages, there's a number of potential advantages. One advantage is it can actually simplify the work that you do, right? So it may be that there's some stuff that you're collecting internally and investing time in putting together that is actually available from some other data source or other data system in your jurisdiction, from the courts, from the police. And by building those linkages, you can actually lessen the amount of work you have to do to collect data on your own. So that could be a potential advantage. You also have the ability, I think, to really, in some cases, make very compelling arguments about that last benefit, about the kind of value of services. I can think of one recent study that was done, a fascinating, recently released study in Harris County, for example, where some researchers were able to link data on prosecutions to earnings and tax information that was maintained by the state of Texas, and demonstrated in a very convincing way that diversion programs actually lead to increased employment and earnings for people who get diverted and increase the state's tax revenue. So that's a situation now where, if you're a head DA and you want to, kind of go to the county commissioners and say, gee, we could really use an investment in more resources in order to be able to divert people more effectively, where you now, as a result of this linkage between your data system and some of these other systems, are in a strong position to say, and hey, by the way, what our data and research tell us is that as we successfully divert people, that actually improves, the financial state of the county, because people are more productive and they're able to, contribute more economically in the future. So, it's an investment that over time could potentially generate a lot of benefits for our community. So those are some of the things that become available through these linkages. Another thing that you may be able to do is generate really useful insights for other actors within the system. So, that's kind of the gold standard, but it's one that, we've seen examples of where it's achieved and where those sort of data can really be very kind of beneficial in moving the needle in terms of resourcing decisions and being able to improve public confidence. So, one of the issues that comes up as we go at any point in this, kind of 1 through 4 process is to what extent and, do we want to try and use our data and report out to the public what we're doing. Interestingly, right, if we look at the national survey, while there's a lot of places that are collecting various types of data internally for various purposes, for the most part, we haven't yet fully realized, I think, the potential of data. If we look at this national sample of prosecutors for being able to improve public transparency, it's still, a minority of offices that are publishing data, summary statistics. Here's our caseload. Here's what happens. If we look at your responses, again, a little bit better, but still, a minority of your organizations which are yet to the point where there are opportunities to publish data on your operations. And so that's a kind of a work in progress everywhere, but it's definitely, I think, an issue to think about. And there are certainly examples we can point to where I think organizations have gotten substantial value from being able to say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's the results of what we've been able to do. And kind of brought that information before the public. But in order to do that, of course, we have to have data. So let me talk a little bit about what some of the common concerns are regarding data, and then I'm going to try and end with, excuse me, a few more positive suggestions for how we might be able to move forward and use data. So in the survey of prosecutor offices, there were 3 main concerns that arose, and these may feel fairly familiar to you. One is a concern, are data accurate, right? And if they're not accurate, maybe we don't want to use them. I think the classic example would be data on race, ethnicity. In the criminal justice system, we know most of us who have looked at those data tend to not be collected in a very systematic way. Maybe we have concerns about the accuracy. I think that's a legitimate concern, although it's also one, right, that I think maybe shouldn't be a barrier for a couple of reasons. First of all, scientists and researchers are getting increasingly adept at figuring out ways to, despite various types of inaccuracies in data, still be able to generate useful insights. And so that's something that I think is something that we can kind of overcome. It's also the case, right, that with respect to data accuracy, the choice might be either we have no data or we have some data which is imperfect, but may have, but still correlated with what we want to measure. And the question that we really have to ask is, are we likely to be able to make better decisions with data that might not be perfectly accurate, but that is somewhat informative, or are we going to make a better decision with no data at all? And, I think often the answer is probably some data, even if imperfect, is probably better than no data. So a second concern that you can see here on the slide is that, how do we find the time and the resources to collect data? and I'll provide some suggestions on that in a moment, but I think that's a legitimate concern. And then a final concern that comes up fairly frequently is that, hey, you know what, each case is very individual, and so the sort of data that we could get from administrative systems really aren't sufficiently nuanced to be helpful. I just had a discussion not too long ago with our DA here in Philadelphia about that issue, right? And again, I think that's a reasonable concern, but it's also a concern that really depends a lot on the question that you want to ask. And there are certain ways data can be used, I think, productively, including asking, you know, kind of cause and effect issues where it's possible for us to overcome that lack of nuance. And, you know, for some, I think, very important questions, like, you know, the question of how many people want, you know, to access the services of your CIU and what's happening in their cases, while there may be a lot of nuance missing, that's still kind of just a very basic piece of information you want to know. And the fact that the data there aren't necessarily have all the details about every case, you know, I think it's pretty obvious that we still learn things. So that's a real concern, but I don't think it needs to be like a prohibitive one. So what were some of the concerns that you raised in this survey? I think there were a lot of questions about, you know, how do we actually go about collecting data and making sure that it's accurate? And again, I'll give you a couple of concrete suggestions at the end. And, you know, one person raised, and I think this is a persistent challenge, although one that tends to be fairly, it's common across places, but this particular solution often has to do with the specific data system and the organizational setup of your own organization. Is, you know, all right, so we're actually collecting a lot of data, but I want to be able to kind of customize my views of the data or understand it in a way that there isn't some sort of prepackaged easy way I can use that do that using our case management system, or you know, kind of with the software I have access to. And again, I have one suggestion for that. So let me, you know, kind of finish off by saying, all right, so we've got these different types of data, legitimate concerns. If this was an area where we wanted to make improvements, what are some specific suggestions that I might have? And I just want to open it up for discussion. So the first suggestion I have here is, you know, I've provided this data collection roadmap, the first, you know, these 4 different tiers of data collection. We all are at different places. That's okay. But I would encourage you, if this is an area where you want to improve, I think the first place is figure out where you are on the roadmap and decide, you know, what would be the most beneficial way to potentially expand, right? And so for some folks, that could be we need to start counting cases. For other people, and I think most of you at least had access to that of the incoming and outgoing case counts, maybe it's actually expanding in some marginal but useful way the sort of information that you get about each case. So maybe it's, hey, we've never actually really coded up, is this a case that involves DNA before? And so, you know, going forward, maybe we want to try and collect that. And again, I would think about the data collection with the aim in mind of not just, hey, you know, we'll collect data for data's sake, but what are the types of questions that it would be most useful for me to be able to answer internally within my organization, or as we go out to donors or other constituents, and what sort of data would I need in order to be able to better answer those questions. So let's imagine that we kind of say, all right, now I want to collect more data. What else can we do? You know, I think, you know, we couldn't have a discussion of data without talking a little bit about information technology. And, you know, there, again, we're all in very different places. We have different case management systems, different levels of ease or difficulty in terms of implementing IT-based solutions. What I would say here is that, again, information technology can often be helpful here if deployed in the right way. And when I say IT, right, I don't necessarily mean for every data application we need some sort of complicated system or algorithm, or we have to hire a bunch of contract, you know. IT can also mean an Excel spreadsheet, right? And I think the key is to just think about how do we match the technology to the purpose and the tool of data collection. And sometimes it may be, just tracking stuff in a spreadsheet and having that readily available is the right solution. I think in other ways we might need, changes to a case management system or something. And there are ways that we can use the technology to make the data work better. So for example, a number of you had questions about how do I make sure that the data are actually input and used in different ways. So one, simple way that IT can help us, right, is, and this is something we could do in the context of a simple Excel spreadsheet or a very complicated case management system. One of the things that we could do is, rather than just allowing people to type in free-form information, which then in the future might become very difficult to catalog or what if we actually give them a set of choices, a drop-down box where you can select, from a few different general categories, right? So that's something that you could implement within an IT system that could actually go a long way to ensuring better uniformity and usability of data, and helping to make sure if you have different people collecting data, that it's collected in a consistent way. I was just last week working with a court watching organization on its data systems, and one of the improvements that they're going to implement that I think is going to help them a lot is essentially reformulating the format for intaking data so that there are more, kind of automated choices rather than just free-form responses, and that'll make their data a lot more usable. So I think there's things like that we can do. And let me just emphasize here that the best solution isn't necessarily always a complicated one. We just did a work with a public defender organization that made a pilot that they had, and they wanted to say, okay, how do we collect information about these new cases? And what we realized there was that they actually had pretty good linkability of their case management system and other records. And so really all they needed to do was build a spreadsheet that tracked, all of the clients that were coming through this pilot. And once they had that, we could easily link it to other data systems to get the insights that they wanted. So there, despite the fact that there was a relatively sophisticated organization, they had these other capabilities. Really the best solution was a spreadsheet, right? And we were able to get a lot of useful information from other places. So trying to kind of match the IT to the problem. And again, if people have specific questions or situations that they want to talk about online, happy to do that. So a third thing, which I think may feel fairly unfamiliar to people, but is nonetheless quite commonplace in the research world, is I think we have this idea that if we're going to collect data on one case, we really have to collect the same data for every single case that we handle. And while that's like very logical, intuitive, it's also not necessarily correct, right? There's all sorts of information that we get about the population of our jurisdictions, about the unemployment rate, about many other facets of life, where in fact we aren't looking at the entire population, we're just using some sort of a subset. And for those who are concerned that, hey, data collection might be too time intensive, it might be hard to do, one potential solution that might actually still allow you to get good insights is some sort of sampling, right? Where instead of looking at every single case, you look at some subset of the cases. I had a discussion with a public defender recently about looking at their data. They basically don't have they're kind of at the very beginning place in terms of data collection. And with that public defender, it seemed kind of daunting, but one of the things I pointed out is, hey, if you do enough cases that you could, if you had good information about 1 out of every 10 or even 1 out of every 20 cases, that would probably get you to kind of 95% of the insights that you would get if you had data on every case. So actually, the data collection and entering and management problem might be a lot smaller. Now, the one kind of warning or caution I'd raise here is that it can matter a lot how you select. If you aren't going to look at every case, it can matter a lot about how you select cases. And so that's something where it might be helpful to get some insights from someone who has a little bit more statistical knowledge. Let me also mention that the sampling approach can also work well if you're in a situation where, hey, now we want to collect some new data item, but we want some comparability as to what happened in the past, right? And so the question is, do we really have to go back and like recode or look through all of the previous cases in order to be able to kind of compare yesterday to the future? And the answer is maybe, but you may be able, if you do need to do that, it may be that there's a way to accomplish that with less work that involves doing some sort of sampling. And then the final suggestion I would have is, try and work with partners. So there's a lot of enthusiasm about criminal justice reform. Here in the university, we talk a lot with students and other folks who are interested in what prosecutors do, what innocence projects do. There's, I think, a number of examples of productive ways where we've seen organizations like yours be able to engage with local academic institutions and other groups in order to increase their ability to use and understand their data. We had an interesting conversation a while ago here at the Quattrone Center with a prosecutor's office in a major city that has a partnership with a local academic institution. And so every semester there's a course where a bunch of students come in, they present some sort of internal data challenge. It's a computer science course. And so the students come up with some sort of solution to help them better understand their data. Sometimes they're fantastic solutions, sometimes they aren't great, but it doesn't require lots of additional investment by the prosecutor and the help from the outside partner. This can help in terms of coding and data collection. We've seen examples of that. And again, I think you may kind of underappreciate the sort of enthusiasm that outside partners, particularly academic organizations, might bring to this. Students, faculty, I think people are interested in helping to make the process better. And some of the data that you have internal to your organization is stuff that hasn't been looked at or used a lot by researchers. And so, I think there's some opportunities to work with nonprofits and particularly with academic institutions to help you be able to collect and analyze and think about data. So you've been, and I didn't mean to talk for that long, you've been kind of a very patient audience, and I appreciate that. I'd be happy to take, if you have questions, specific situations that you want to talk about.
And folks, you can either use the group chat function that's up, or just feel free to kind of call out a question that you might have for Paul. You just might have to unmute yourself first.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul, I'll start then. You talked about using, obviously, kind of different data collection software programs or Excel spreadsheets. Are there commercially available programs that people can look to start to use that might be a good guide for helping to figure out how to get all this started if they haven't already?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think the answer is yes. In my experience, rather than me just tossing out names of programs, I think often, like rarely is it the case that there isn't some sort of commercial program that can be helpful, but what the particular software might be, I think often is very specific to the particular data situation that someone is looking at. And, there may also be procurement or other issues that are kind of unique to your organization. Again, I think that this is an area where, kind of working with partners or talking to us or, other like organizations, maybe we can provide some useful guidance. So, the answer, Marissa, is yes, but I would, rather than giving some sort of a blanket recommendation, I think the better thing to do is to provide a little bit more information about your own situation to a trusted expert and let us try and come up with something that's a little bit more custom to your situation. But, you know, in my experience, it's actually fairly uncommon with respect to the second point that there isn't, you know, a potential information technology solution that can be helpful in making it easier to collect various types of data. Any other questions? Again, I appreciate those who took the time to respond to the survey. It was interesting to see. And again, not surprising to me. This is a group which I think is maybe a little bit further along in the data curve than many others. And, you know, I just think one of the messages is wherever we are, it's okay, but there are always opportunities for improvement. And we, you know, we'll of course make available to you the slides from the presentation so that you can review this information. And also, you know, we're happy to engage with you, you know, kind of beyond this webinar. If you have specific questions about the work that you're doing or specific situations, you know, we're happy to do that. We, you know, we want to be helpful. And, you know, I think, you know, we can't solve every problem, but, you know, there's certainly a number of instances where I think we've been able to point people to, you know, a little bit more useful solutions in these areas. All right, well, I think that's all I had to share. So if there aren't any additional questions, again, thanks for your participation. Marissa, have we, do we have on the calendar the next one of these webinars? Or is
We
that...
do, actually, thank you, Paul. So as folks on the call know, and there's some folks joining us from kind of outside the grant program, we have these webinars the second Wednesday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The next webinar will be on January 8th. We'll be joined by Steve Kleinman, who is a retired Air Force colonel, and he'll be talking with us about cognitive interviewing as a method for interviewing witnesses, particularly on very old cases, very sensitive cases, in ways that do not harm the witness's memory, but really try to get down deep into a witness's memory to get accurate and reliable information about what they've experienced through that. So I also just want to kind of put out there, if folks do have follow-up questions from this, if you want to share the information, we've been recording this. We'll make the recording available. As Paul said, his slides will be available. You know, certainly we can reach out to Paul and ask him in his very copious free time to help answer questions that folks have that are very specific. And anything else you need, please feel free to reach back to us here at the center. We're obviously here to help, and this is kind of what we're here for. So we really appreciate everybody's time today, and we'll see you again in January.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
everyone.
Thank you.